Hello and welcome back to Dream Girl. I'm Sheen, your host, and today we're joined by the wonderful Alice Law. Alice is a lot of things. I'll try to do a fair justice to her introduction. She is a podcaster herself. She's also a stress and wellness expert. She is the author of the Sunday Times bestseller, Unstressable, and she's just generally here to solve all of our stress problems. Hi, Alice.
Hi. It's big ask. I'm joking.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, super excited to have you here. So, what are the stress levels today?
Stress levels are good, actually.
Yeah?
Today they're good. We thought we were going to be late, but the traffic suddenly was on my side. So, I was like...
Oh, wow. You had a good experience with the traffic.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I understand why she's not stressed now. So give us a little introduction about yourself, your career trajectory till now.
Yeah, so I really didn't think I was going to do this at all. I originally thought I wanted to be in fashion. I went to do a fashion degree at university and was doing every fashion internship under the sun every summer before then. And then went to go and work for Net-a-Porter after university in the styling placement then. And it was then I decided, I was like, actually, after the styling graduate program, I was like, I want to start my own fashion line. So I went to get a job on the side. I was like, I stumbled upon being a PA for a Russian Oligarch's family office, which was, again, quite a high stress environment because I was PA for two MDs and, it was like that constant kind of keep going. They were wonderful and we were a small team. I was very lucky because at that time, from having had a very lucky upbringing in terms of stress, I was, lucky that my parents were together and my dad had built himself a successful business and I hadn't struggled with, anything like bullying or stuff at school like so many people do. And I just had those usual teenage angst and growing pains of exams and, your crush and various things going wrong, everything we all deal with. My dad had cancer when I was 3, but he recovered and my parents hid it so well at that point. Me and my sister just thought that he had flu and was recovering in the spare bedroom after he came back. Do you know what I mean? It was just like, I was very, in a very nice bubble almost.
No big bumps.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then it was what I'd like to call the universe was like, well, you need to understand the other side and you can understand how extremely calm you can feel and then how extremely stressed. And so it kind of sent me to what I call stress school. So I experienced loss in every aspect of my life, continually one after the other, which originally started when my dad, after the 2008 credit crisis, like so many people, struggled with having to put his businesses into administration from financial struggle over a period of a few years, forced to sell our home. And at that time, that was like the first time I'd really seen my dad like really, really stressed and his demeanor started to change. He was laughing less and sort of drinking a bit more. And it was just a bit of a different angle to him because he was always so charismatic with all the answers and calm and wonderful. And during that time, my eldest half-sister Suzanne got diagnosed with colon cancer out of the blue. And that was a big shock because my dad, like I said, he was diagnosed when I was 3 with cancer, recovered, but he'd actually lost his twin sister to cancer at the exact same age that my sister now was, with the exact same age children and the exact same gender children, so boy and girl. And so for him, I remember him walking into the kitchen just being like, I can't believe this is happening again. What is happening? And so Suzanne had a 4-year struggle with it. And, that was, as anyone knows whose family member has cancer, it's just a horrible thing to deal with and watch. And we devastatingly lost her 4 years later. And it was during that time that my dad, so his business had gone under. He had a lawsuit against him that was from people we actually knew for a loss on investment that was wrongfully accusing him of something, but he only managed to prove that in his final days. So it was this ongoing thing and it was draining his finances, a lot of stress. There was financial struggle, there was that mental struggle. He was now making himself more ill, you could see. And after actually my sister's funeral, he got rushed to hospital 4 days later from a blood clot because he'd just been depressed and not moving. And they scanned his body, found, resolved the clot, all was well, but they found that he now had cancer again. And at this point, because he was just so devastated from losing his daughter, he'd lost his business, he just felt, he was at that generation as well, and men provide, and he felt that was his identity. He'd really just given up. And I was so stressed at this point, I was just...
I can't even imagine. I can feel my heart rate rising.
I was, I would go to work, like I say, and my job was to remember stuff for other people. And I could barely remember my name because I was so stressed. I'd forget things all the time. And I had a relationship at the time that had just ended after my sister died from him cheating on me when he moved abroad. And I realized at this point, I then got made redundant when my bosses had to leave the UK market and they were like, do you want to move abroad? And I was like, no. And, and you're just like, everything just felt like it was just continually one thing after the other. And it was over this period of time, I realized, I was like, well, nothing that's happening can be changed by me. It's all very externally out of my control. So I was like, what can I do? So I started to, at the time, self-study and start to understand stress and study meditation and mindfulness and Reiki and how it works in the mind, how it works in the body, all these different things. And I was like, oh wow, this stuff really works. And it was bringing me back to myself again. And it was then 4 years after my sister died that my wonderful dad was rushed to hospital, and we lost him devastatingly 3 weeks later to a burst stomach ulcer that had burst and caused internal complications. And so for me, I was already doing what I was doing just before then, for a couple of years. But that really, really sealed the kind of mission that I had, really. I really wanted to help people to understand not just the effect stress has on the individual, but on the family, and how we all have that responsibility and also have that ability to change things for ourselves in the way we respond to life. And so it's now my mission to try and help as many. Well, mine and Mo, we are my co-author on Unstressable, wonderful Mo. We have a joint mission to take 1 million people a year out of stress, because it sounds big, but we think it's doable, and it's so important to us.
Well, first of all, I'm very sorry for your losses. And it's wonderful to see how you've turned this into a mission. And I truly respect that. And I think you're doing great work. And I think 1 million is very doable, because the number of people around the world who are stressed out is crazy.
I know.
And the fact, but for me, what I want to understand, right, because there's so much strength of character that I see here, right? Because the way so I'll tell you why I think that. Because for me, whenever something goes wrong, but I have this weird habit of like going in my head and I have this mental checklist. And I'm like, okay, but this is okay right now. So it's just this one problem. I can handle it because the rest is fine. But when you go through the checklist and nothing is going right, like, where do you get the comfort from? You don't know where to turn to. And the fact that you were able to turn that into self-introspection and trying to find out what the problem is, what do you think helped you become that kind of like strong person?
You're very kind. I think it's interesting you say that, because I had a teacher actually in America who works with this stuff, and she said that you always heal one part first. And with Unstressable, for example, we work with mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual stress. And I definitely know that the spiritual healing was the way in for me to find the strength, just for the order that I needed to do it. My body was the last part I ended up healing, strangely enough. And sometimes it's completely the other way around for other people, and different layers, different times it's right for that person, that soul. I think I found, originally I was listening to, my first was listening to the authors at Hay House at the time on podcasts. And just as at that time, because this was when I was first started reading about all this, when I was 23, 34 now. And at that time, social media was not flooded with this stuff. Do you know what I mean? It's like, people like me were not annoying you online or vice versa. It was really, my friends weren't talking about it. It was very isolating, like you say. It's like, so I think I found that strength originally through a sense of spirituality and trying to make sense of this, to make myself not feel like a victim, that life had done this to me, and rather that the more I learned from these incredible spiritual teachers, whether it was like Dr. Wayne Dyer and reading and all these different people, I started to put together my own sense of understanding that this was happening for me for a greater reason. And even if I couldn't yet see that, I did have at that point hopes later that I'm going to write a book one day. I never knew when that would be, and that I'd be sat here talking to you about my book now. But it was definitely, I think, that sense of going inward spiritually first that gave me the strength to then tackle the mental side and tackle the emotional side. That was my personal experience, because like I said, everyone's different. And some people have been in such a traumatic state of stress growing up that they have to heal the nervous system in the body first to even be able to access that side. So it's really it's really dependent on what's the first part for you that's going to give you that in. But for me, it was spirituality.
That makes sense. And, I like what you said about life happening for you, because I remember one time I was on a walk with a friend of mine and I kept complaining. At that time, I just had a car accident and I hated my job, and I kept saying, oh, all of these things are happening to me. I don't get it. I'm such a good person. And he stopped me and he said, why do you think life is happening to you rather than for you? Who do you think is out there trying to get you? Like, who's the enemy? And I was like, that's true. Why is the victim mentality, right? You immediately become a victim, but you're a victim to who? Like,
but this is true, isn't it? And it's like, when you think about it, when you think about before those challenges, everything, you can never see it usually when you're right in it, or definitely not before if you think about something terrible happening in the future. But when you look back and you think about the version of you before that challenge, if you've actually moved through it and you've done some healing and some introspection, some awareness, and you've grown, you can't really recognize the person you were before in a great way. You think, God, I wouldn't trade myself for that version anymore. And I could never have become this version without this extreme challenge. So I think it's definitely, like you say, like changing that to not be the victim, but rather using it as much as you can.
And look, now you're on this mission, and how many people's lives you're going to touch, you're already touching. So that's amazing. But you know what I find extremely funny is all of our stress response, right? And I know you talk about this a lot, how stress also affects our physical health. And all our stress responses, for example, getting anxiety and stuff in the past, all of these used to be triggered when we were running away from danger or like, about to be killed. But now you get an email on your phone and the same stress response, the fight, flight comes in. And you touched on this as well at the start, is all external factors. We live in a world where we are constantly connected to everyone else. And also, but loneliness has never been as high in the world. Depression has never been as high. So how do you protect yourself? Maybe this is something from the book as well. How do you start to build these skills in order to be a little bit less swayed by the external circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, like you say, we are, first of all, it's really important you said that, because I think something for everyone to realize is that while you might not have something in inverted commas in your mind that's stressful going on in your life right now, your nervous system doesn't care because of the world you've put it in. We've all decided, if you're listening to this, most likely to live in the modern world, to live in a fast-paced environment, or to, be a working professional, whatever it is. And so you're going to be subjected to a lot of micro stress, which I'll come on to, that's actually flooding your system in a way that it's never had to deal with before. And so that, as the base level on top of life's challenges that you can't control, makes for a very, very interesting concoction of stress, which is where we're really struggling, because I know I definitely wasn't brought up being like, this is how you calm your nervous system. This is how you regulate an emotion. This is how you deal with your thoughts. We just weren't taught how to do that. So we've kind of been thrown into this modern world having no idea how to deal with any of our systems, and then expecting the best.
Just power through.
Just power through. And that's the thing. So, I mean, for my starting point is always awareness, right? We can never change what we're not aware of. And so in the book Unstressable, we looked at putting together this model that can actually show you where your stress is coming from, not just from the outside, from the inside as well. So it's called a ton of stress. So it's TONN. And that's, macro external, which we call trauma in the book. Trauma is a big topic, but for the sake of this model, it's the macro external stresses in your life that you can't control. So these big events that change your life that you expect to cause you stress, and they do at the time, but most people bounce back and have post-traumatic growth, like we were talking about earlier. And it's an intense at the time, and then it'll go away. But so that's macro external. We can't do anything about limiting that. Macro internal is obsessions. And obsessions are that one story that you will tell yourself over and over again that causes you a lot of internal stress. So it can be triggered from an outside event, or it can just be completely made up from something we've decided subconsciously within ourselves. So, for example, you have a really bad breakup, and then you convince yourself forever that you're never going to meet anyone, that you're always going to be alone, that you're not worthy. And that's the continual narrative that you tell yourself. And that internal conversation can set your stress response off. So obsessions are the macro external. Then you have micro internal. So that is what we call noise. And that is just because our brains are hardwired to look for threats to keep us safe. Every human being naturally has around 80% negativity bias in our brains. And so it's just looking to keep us safe for the threats. So those little negative comments that we internally tell ourselves, you know, me looking in the mirror in the morning and saying, oh, Alice, your hair's frizzy today.
Yeah.
You know, like one of those comments isn't going to kill you, but most of us don't make one comment in the day. We allow them to be littered through. And so that's the micro internal, and then the micro external, which is going back to that point that we were talking about, this modern world that we've created for ourselves, is what we call nuisances. And nuisances are everywhere.
It's the best word ever.
They really are nuisances.
Yeah.
This is the thing, you know. And nuisances are, you wake up to an aggressive factory setting alarm that jolts you out of bed. I kid you not, I had a new phone the other week and I'd swapped it over, but for some reason my alarm, because I wake up to a very soothing like alarm meditation song.
Did you have the emergency one?
I had the emergency one. And I had this flood of cortisol and I was like, this is the reason I haven't done this for years. Why do people wake up like this? You know, you're just automatically putting your system on as soon as you've woken up. Someone will turn over, look at their phone, go immediately into their phone, start swiping.
Barrage of notifications.
Exactly. Notifications, WhatsApp notifications, the aggressive, upsetting news headlines, multiple different ones, go into social media. You'll be upset either by a comment that someone's made on a public post or your post, or you'll be upset that you saw a friend doing something that you wish you could, you know, comparing yourself to an influencer, whatever it is. Then you go and look at your emails. You haven't replied to something. You realize you're going to be late to that.
Yeah.
You know, you've already sort of flooded your system with micro stress before you've even gotten out of bed. Then you'll go into the kitchen and you might have, you know, realized that you don't have any coffee pods that day.
Yeah, the milk has
milk's
gone
off. You know, if you're a mother or, you know, your child's sock is missing for school and you're late and you then get stuck in traffic on the way to your meeting. The average person we looked at will have had about 15 to 18 micro stress doses before they've even left the house. And so when you think of it that way, if that's building up in your system and that's your starting point for the day because you've gone straight into your phone, you've gone straight into reaction rather than response, you're not giving yourself a good chance for the rest of the day that's going to stress you out from the modern world when your coworker comes up to you and tells you something upsetting and then you've already got this level, or, you know, your partner says that they can't pick the kids up that evening and you now have to work it all out. And all these little things add up. And then when the big thing happens, you can immediately break. But equally, when another small thing happens, it's like the straw that broke the camel's back. You know, it's like, oh, and that's the final straw.
That's it. Yeah.
And so when you look at where your stress is actually coming from those trauma obsessions, noise and nuisances, and get obviously really honest about the internal as well. You know, how much are you talking to yourself negatively? What story are you telling yourself at the moment that's really actually giving you a lot of stress? And is it even true? When we can work out where that stress is coming from, then we can actually limit the needless stress that we can control. So limiting, for example, the amount you're watching the news, because let's be honest, if something is incredibly important in the news, someone around you will tell you.
You'll
and then
hear
you can look at it. And so you don't need to watch the news 7 times a day because our brain can't tell the difference between you being there and you watching it. You know, emotionally, the reaction, the stress response will go off. It's the same. And so limiting things like that, changing your aggressive factory setting alarm, you know, giving yourself actual space and boundaries with your WhatsApp notifications, with your social media, with your email times, and just creating a little bit of a system in that digital influx and various little micro stresses in your life. Once you've limited what you can with those, then you can actually move on to deal with learning the skills to manage, you know, your mind, your emotions, your body, and your soul. And that obviously we handle, you know, how to process stress that we can't control and actually, you know, regulate our nervous system.
Wow. Okay. So much to digest here. I was just thinking while you're talking to me and I was like, there's so much. You know the thing about waking up in the morning and not looking at your phone immediately? I know this, but I still do it. I will just scroll through. I won't open anything. However, I'm already stressed. I woke up today stressed because I looked at it and I was like, oh no, oh she didn't do this. Oh, no. And I was like, okay, it's so much to tackle. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to sleep for 5 more minutes and then I'll wake up. But the stress is already there.
It's already there. And it's like out of sight, out of mind, right? So if you have it on your bedside table, because of the addiction we have to our phones and that dopamine hit we get, the average person, now studies show, will tap and swipe their phone over 2,500 times a day, which is crazy. But that's the sort of addiction we've created for ourselves. So I always say to people, if you're struggling to have that boundary to say no, because it's just so easy when it's there, we just think, oh, just pick it up and check it no matter what. Then it's, put your phone in a what I call like a graveyard for the evening, put it in a drawer for 2 hours in a different room, out of sight, out of mind. Or when you're going to bed, put your phone on airplane mode and either charge it out of the room on the other side of the room and get like a, nice
physical alarm
alarm, like one of those light ones that gets lighted, that's soothing or whatever it is. But just to try and make yourself not go on your phone first thing in the morning to create that space.
No, I agree. I think that's a very good point, because we all start our days badly. And as you said, I had this thing where I read this thing about, the voice you hear the most in your whole lifetime is that voice in your head. And then I got really sucked into this. And apparently, some people don't even hear it as a voice. Some people see it as pictures.
I have a friend like that, and it blew my mind. Yeah.
Same. I was like, wait, am I hearing it, or is it a picture? I don't know anymore. And I was like, no, but I'm not that harsh to myself. I'm pretty, every now and then I will say it. But then that thing I was reading said, it's not just about the mean things. It's also about the victim mentality. Is that voice a victim? Does it keep telling you, oh, but this is not going to happen for us. This is hard for us. Maybe let's just not do it. Let's go back to our comfort. That's also bad.
Yeah.
And then I realized, but that is there in my head. I do think that sometimes, especially when things don't work out, it's like, oh, it's always me. Like, why doesn't it work out for me? And I was like, yeah, that's the voice.
It is.
She's telling me that. And that leads to all the stress that happens. So it is the inner dialogue as well. And people automatically think it's just, oh, but I'm not mean to myself in my head. But
100%. It's like the same thing if you flip that voice around. If you had someone who was following you around all day that was telling you how amazing you were and how stuff was going to work out, and how great and easy everything is, you come back at the end of the day feeling pretty good about yourself and your life, or at least thinking, I could handle this. I've got this. The same way if you have someone following you around all day telling you how useless you are.
Terrible.
You're terrible, and how this is going to go wrong and you can't do that. You'll come back at the end of the day feeling drained, feeling stressed, feeling tired. And that's the reality. We do have those two voices on either shoulder. It's up to us which one we're going to allow in. And that, having that realization that you're not that internal dialogue and you can control it is one of the most powerful things we can do for, for our mental stress, for example, because it has such an effect on us, on our system, on setting off our stress response, on our self-confidence, on our self-worth, and just in our ability to actually think resiliently, yeah, I can get this done, or I can get through this, or I can't.
Okay, let me ask you a question then, because you're saying if the good is there as well, it will then replace the bad. But I've noticed this with myself that, for example, I post something and I can get 1,000 positive comments. And then I get this one person who's just a little bit mean. And that's the one thing that I hold on to. And I've seen this experiment that they do with a lot of people. It's the same thing, right? We all catch up that negative thing. So then how do you counterbalance that?
That is the natural negativity bias, right? So it's your brain being like, no, there's the threat. We have to nurture the threat. We might not survive. Because our brain is wired to keep us safe. And like you said earlier, what used to be the tiger is now the email. Your system hasn't caught up with the modern world. It's just trying to keep you safe. So the same response is still going off. So when that horrible comment comes in, the natural human thing to do is to look at that and then just sit with that and go in with that and then think, well, why have they said that? What have I, and start to actually question the reality of what, at the end of the day, this mean person who's clearly very, very unhappy themselves because, happy people don't hurt other people. That's the reality, isn't it? And so it's looking at then, okay, the facts. So you have to ask yourself, okay, the facts are I've had one comment out of 1,000. So I'm not I can't do maths in that sense. But the reality is that it's, 0.01% of that entire interaction you've had online. Statistically. Yeah. So what is it about that one comment I always do this reflection. It's either like shutting it out and telling yourself, okay, brain, bring me a useful thought, changing that dialogue with yourself. What are the great comments that have made you feel good? Pick 5 and start to reread those. And why are those true? And then why is the one that isn't kind actually either untrue, because most likely it is untrue. Yeah. Why is that one untrue? Or why does it matter to you? And starting to go into that reflective awareness, because the more we can realize, okay, if that's upsetting me, what is it within me I need to heal so that this doesn't upset me anymore, because that person's opinion really is invalid. You know,
No.
it shouldn't have that effect on us, but it does, because we're human, and it can upset us. So I always say with emotions, for example, a negative emotion is only ever trying to alert you of one or two things. It's either trying to alert you to something outside of yourself that you need to take action on and change, or something inside of yourself that you need to process and heal. That's it. And so when we can understand when we're being triggered by that, you know, that upsetting comment, okay, well, should I take action and block this person and ignore them from my account? Or should I take action and just, you know, get off social media, whatever it is? Or has this hurt me so much that actually I'm going to use this as a teaching moment for myself to be like, why has this comment activated something in me that actually isn't, you know, anything to do with me? And sort of journal on that, being like, okay, what is this about? Why do I feel that way? Why might I feel that way? And what can I do about it? You know? And it is definitely just trying to navigate with the mind to say, right, this is how we move through it, rather than getting attached to this one person who's trying to bring us down in this sad day of theirs.
Yeah. I really like what you said about negative emotions being one of two things. And I think a lot of times we don't want to see the mirror, right? That it's putting up against you, being like, why do you feel this way? Why is it triggering that little piece of you? It's probably because, as you said, there's something that needs to be dealt with on the inside. But you know, in today's world, where hustle culture is kind of like the main thing, everyone needs to be hustling. Because even for me, you know, my whole life, I've done a PhD, I was working in a corporate job, then now I have a business, and I keep adding on things. And I'm like, why? Because I've realized that if I'm not busy, if I'm not overworked, I tend to think that I'm being lazy. And that correlation between, you know, being overworked is what you're going for in terms of that's guaranteed success, guaranteed that you're working hard, is something I see around me. I have a friend, she quit her job to do her business, and now she's going back to get a job, not because her business is not working, because she's underutilized. And I thought, that's the hustle culture, because we have become so addicted to that feeling of stress that we think if we don't have that, I'm not working. So how do you recognize the line and that boundary between, you know, being about to get burnt out, you know, almost, and just, you know, doing your normal amount of job?
Totally. I love that you said that, because I talked about this in the book, was saying, you know, being busy has become like a status symbol today. And it's, you know, if you ask a friend often, how are you? I'm so good, I'm so busy. It's such a normal answer for people. And it's like, why is that the answer? Instead of actually saying, you know, I'm great, you know, work's going well, but I've taken some space for myself today, and I went for a walk on the beach and I felt good. I did some exercise, you know, whatever it is. It's like, but it's like, no, I'm so busy. I'm doing this. I don't know if I'll be able to, you know, it's just constant. We are like, we're always on the go. Like you say, and we've created this culture that somehow glorifies being busy as productivity and success, and puts down if someone has space but has actually created something that's doing well, that will make them panic to think, well, this is too good to be true. What? No, I must be doing something wrong, because other people are looking at me with judgment, because guess what? They're busy and miserable.
They hate their job.
They are envying the fact that you've managed to create something that you've realized has a balance in life. You know, that typical work-life balance question that everyone wants to solve. And if we can actually learn to work, you know, smarter, not harder, in the sense of actually having boundaries within our day. No one is more productive when they're stressed and unhappy. We're 31% less productive. But we have decided that society thinks that when you're stressed, you'll get more out of your employees. And that's not true. That's true short term. Like when you have a 5-day deadline and you think, okay, I need to get this over the line. Continually, chronic stress, which leads to burnout, like you were talking about, is just debilitating us and making us less productive, making us unhappy, making us less, you know, able to have great relationships, both personally and professionally. It just is no good for anyone, and eventually leads to disease and illnesses and fatalities, like my wonderful dad. And we've created, like you say, this society that glorifies being stressed and busy over having, you know, this modern day, essentially what could be called the modern day flex of actually having space and calm and contentment whilst also getting the results we want, because somehow it's all got mixed up in our heads. But I think to begin to start that, we have to start putting in really good boundaries within ourselves for what we know we need to make your system, yourself, the best possible version, so that then it can deal with the challenges that come from work, the challenges that come from life, but also you can get so much more done in a short space of time when you are feeling good. Everyone knows that. The more stressed you are or the more emotionally upset you are, the more distracted you are, because you're either frantically doing things in a different way, and when we're in fear, we're not doing anything that's that great. You know, we're not making good decisions, we're not being productive, or, you know, you're actually blindsided by, if you're suppressing your emotions and feeling negative emotions and not, you know, moving through them and facing them, you're distracted by that. Everyone knows that feeling of feeling anxious in a conversation because of something going on in your life, and you're with a group of friends and all you're doing is sitting there thinking about how anxious
you're
you
not
are.
here.
You're not in the conversation.
No.
That's the same with your work. That's the same with the things you're doing. So if we can begin to think, okay, if the priority was the starting point is me feeling the best I can, and then everything else will fall into place, that's the mental shift we have to have. And it doesn't take 5 hours a day. This is where people get this wrong. It's not like, okay, well, if I need to manage my stress, I don't have the time, is a lot of people's answer. And I'm like, if you don't have the time, you're the perfect person to need to manage your stress, because no one is that busy. That's the reality. You know, we all think we are, but everyone can make 10 minutes in their day to do a breathing exercise. Everyone can make 5 minutes in their day to actually check in with themselves and ask themselves how they feel, you know, do tiny little interventions throughout the day. And yet we tell ourselves, I'm so busy, I'm so busy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it comes back to like actually creating the space for these practices and noticing and becoming aware of when you are getting to the starting point of feeling stressed rather than the end point of being burnt out and in hospital. And that's when you take action. We've really got to get out of this cure society that we're in. It's like prevent as much as cure. You know, and if we can build this resilience for managing stress when you're not stressed, that's when you see the results to just, first of all, be the best version of yourself and better your well-being. But then when really, really hard times are going on in your life and a period of challenge happens, you will be able to bounce back 10 times quicker than you did before, because you've built this essentially toolbox for yourself within yourself.
Yeah. And I honestly, I was just thinking about this story because one of my friends, he is a lawyer, and he messaged me being like, this is it, I'm done, I hate this job, I'm overworked, I hate it. And I was like, why don't you just go outside for a minute, like go for a little walk? And then after 15 minutes he messaged me like, oh, it's all fine, it's okay. I just needed some air. And that's exactly what you're saying, is that we build it up so much, we forget where we are, we forget that life is bigger than this, and then you just need a little breather. It's okay, this is not it. And then you come back, you're like, oh, actually this is a completely okay situation.
Totally. It's like we even, you know, when we're stressed and busy, we forget to drink water, like a basic thing you need for your body to not be in stress. You know, we're like, oh, I haven't eaten all day, or I haven't, when was the last time I drank? Like 5 hours ago. You know, all these basic things that make your system even more stressed.
I know. And that's the thing. I feel sad for our generation, because the other thing that really resonated is when you said, when we're sitting with a group of people and you can see that this person is not here, and you can see someone checking their phone and they got like a work email or something and they're there, and you can see the thinking behind, oh, I should probably reply to this email, this person messaged me. I don't know, I just feel like this has become a real problem for our generation. And you have people who have career issues, people who have relationship issues. Do you feel like we have created the right community for people to feel like they're okay with sharing with their friends what they're going through?
I think we still got some way to go. I think we are better than, you know, like my dad's generation, for example, that was very just like, you deal with it, stiff upper lip, like get on with it yourself.
Yeah.
I think the shift has happened into people being able to say, I feel anxious or I am stressed, and that's great. But I think the next shift that needs to happen is the reality of supporting our communities in different ways to manage it. So whether that's in the workplace, whether that's your family, whether that's your friendship group, when we know that someone's stressed and we're stressed ourselves, it's actually, you know, giving, particularly in the workplace, you know, giving that person the support they need to manage it so that they can come back and actually work well again, you know, and instead of Get on with it. It's
Let me know
fine.
when you're done.
Let me know when you're done. Okay, great. And I think that just is embedded in culture, right? That cultural change of it being essentially cool to deal with your stress rather than it being like taboo of mental health. I don't even like the term mental health personally, because it blankets something that I don't believe is just mental health. I'm such a holistic believer in the way that we deal with mental and physical and health, that for me, stress is mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual. It's in those 4 parts of us, and when we can understand which part of us is getting stressed, we can then deal with it in the right way for that part. And if we blanket everything as just like mental health and make it more of this kind of, taboo's the wrong word, but because it was such a new thing, particularly, I know in the UK for years, it was like, you can't talk about that. Don't be stupid. Do you know what I mean? It's like, oh my God, Americans talk about their feelings in therapy. You can't possibly talk about it. It was just so. Whereas I think if we can make wellness and preventative management of stress, as well as, resilience, and actually then having the courage to deal with that in the moment, making that something that's brave rather than, God, how pathetic.
Yeah.
That's when everything changes. Because the reality is, it is brave to do that. It is not easy to feel your uncomfortable emotions. If it was, then every single person in the world would manage them very quickly and easily. But the reality is, the modern society, a lot of us have repressed our emotions for a long time, numbed them with binge watching Netflix, overworking, over going out, drinking, over socializing, anything we can do to not feel. And so making that, holding space for each other to tell each other how we're feeling, whether it's stress or whatever it is, and actually making that the normal, I think is just so important, because the reason why we all struggle as well is like that lack of connection, that lack of community. We didn't get to this point in society by not having tribes when we were in cave times, like just one isolated person fighting a lion. That's not how we got there. Do you know? It's really about making these things a collective movement, I think. And I do think our generation is definitely seeing it in a different way to, our parents and generations before. But there's still some way to go.
No, agreed. And I'm sure this Harvard study, right? The one which is like the longest study ever done or something, 80 years, where at the end of it, the findings were that the biggest factors contributing to happiness and what was it, like quality of life? It was the quality of your relationship and the community around you rather than success, fame, money. It was just the quality of your relationship determines how happy you are. And I think that that's another thing that probably we as a generation, and especially the future ones, are really struggling with, because relationships have become something so fleeting. We think we are so connected online. Even now, like on the dating apps, people are just swiping and swiping and swiping. And the idea that, oh, well, if this doesn't work out, I can replace it. It meant that people are less willing to invest time and emotions in a relationship to make it work. And therefore, I genuinely feel like the best friends I have are people I've known for a very long time. So we've carried them forward. But I feel like new relationships tend to be very hard to manage. And I think that also explains the high stress levels, because now you're not very comfortable with this person to tell them how you're feeling, what you're going through. And at the same time, you have the added gender factor, men and women, right? I feel like women, like for us, we just met and we can look at each other and tell each other our biggest stresses. And I can tell you, I told you since 10 I used to be stressed, but I feel like men don't really do that. And it's still taboo for men to talk to each other about their mental health stresses. So how do you see us fixing all of this?
It's funny you say that, because I used to do a lot more one-to-one than I do now. Now it's more like going into companies and the platform, and I do limited work consulting with, leaders in businesses. All apart from one of my one-to-one clients have been men. And I truly think, whereas the platform and stuff, and that's women. Men and women. Yeah. But these group things have been a lot of women. And I truly believe that's because with this, for example, I've tried to, as strange as it sounds, to brand what I'm doing with stress. It's like cool and non-taboo, and a way for you to have tools to move it forward, to fix it, right? Yeah. And I think men individually have responded to that very well, because they've been like, well, I can see a stress management consultant, and that's something I can like actively do to like move forwards. I'm not just sitting there
It's more logical.
Yeah, it's more logical, right? It's
Yeah.
giving someone the tools, and equally, okay, well, I'd rather talk about my stress by myself because I don't want
someone
other
else
people
there.
to know.
Yeah.
So it is really interesting. Like you say, it's that complete difference between men and women.
And women are comfortable being in groups to talk about these things.
Totally. And I think that's starting to change, you know, with the more, you know, we're trying to create with Unstressable and companies like different kind of, you know, groups within groups. So it's like, okay, well, if, you know, male leaders are in this group, then they will all relate to each other and they'll be more open to share whatever it is, whether it's leaders and female and male. But it is definitely a difference naturally between women and men. And I actually read this once. It was so interesting because it's literally ingrained in us from day one. Boys are praised for outward, you know, going outwards. It's like throw a ball, you caught it well done. Mum and dad are like, that's great, you know, whereas girls were praised for going inward. It's like, oh, sit still, look good, be pretty, kind, sit down, great. And then girls were praised that way. So that naturally teaches girls to go into their emotions at an earlier age and boys to go into action at an earlier age. And that's the kind of difference between that emotional. Girls are always at a young age, like emotionally looking around, emotionally intelligent, emotionally curious. And men are naturally wired into action, just like they were in cave times. It's like go out of the cave and go and hunt some food and come back. And I think, you know, that struggle of society really seeing emotions as a weakness in men for years in terms of this patriarchal society of masculine, go out, do, achieve in both women and men. It's like in business, we've been praised for doing, going out, achieving more, doing more. No one has been praised in the last 20 years for knowing more within themselves, sitting still and actually being aware. But now, finally, businesses and the world has started to shift to realizing that emotional intelligence is a huge skill that is needed to be able to be a good leader in a business and to be able to be in a good relationship and with yourself and someone else. And I think that shift, like you say, it's like men are still struggling to, I think, have the courage to have that first step. But what I've noticed as well is that once they do, and they share with, you know, their friends, their community, all of them are thinking the same thing inwardly. They just have been too scared to, you know, vulnerably share at that point. And I think it's just something naturally that has come to women much more easier.
It's so interesting when you brought up the way, like, kids are brought up, right? It's so true. And it's the same thing with how girls are always told to, like, nurture and look after everyone. So that's why we develop empathy. And, you know, I saw this reel. Who knows if it's a real study or not, but I saw this reel where it was a study where little girls are asked, they put salt in the food. That's what it was. They made the food salty. It was meant to be a dessert, and they gave it to little girls and little boys, 5 years old, right? And the little girls would lie about it, and they'd be like, it's nice. But the boys would be like, this is disgusting. It's got salt in it. And it's because little girls at 5 don't want to hurt someone else's feelings. Imagine. They have empathy at that age, and it's because we've been told to be that way.
So, and it also, that's the catch-22, right? With, I think, you know, going into that angle of female stresses with why men are so good at saying what they want, stating what they want, taking action, getting what they want, and boundaries. And women will overly compensate to make sure everyone else around them. This is a generalization, but you see this a lot with all my female friends, with a lot of women I meet. And myself, you know, I've had to train myself to actually put great boundaries in the last couple of years because I realized from awareness, I was like, I've got terrible boundaries.
I'm still bad at it.
You're still working on it. Exactly. And it is a forever progress. But I think that's, like you say, that classic thing. If a 5-year-old, all the girls were sat there being like, it's great.
The salt is great. But that's the thing. I'm the same. I recently was I was meant to have a very difficult conversation with some people that I hired who are not doing the job the way they should be doing. And for me, that was so hard. And I realized it's because people-pleasing tendencies. I don't want to offend someone else. I don't want to make them feel like they're bad. But then my boundaries are completely crushed.
Yeah.
People are there. And I'm like, but I want you out, but I don't know how to tell you. And then I recognize that the issue is I was bad at setting the boundaries in the first place. These people are not aware of these boundaries, so it's not really entirely onto them.
Totally. And boundaries with emotional stress are such a huge either hindrance or help, you know. The quote, I think, from Gandhi that I love, that I put in the book was, you know, a strong no is better than a weak yes. And that is so true. The amount of stress that we, both men and women cause themselves by just putting more on your plate, saying yes to something that you don't need to do that week, but you have said yes because you feel like you should do it for either that person, that deadline, whatever it is. And then you get to the point of doing it and you are already at the capacity where you think, I just don't have the capacity, the space for this. You do that thing and you resent the person and then you cause yourself stress, and it's this cyclical cycle of emotional stress. So boundaries in general, time, emotional, actually, looking at your schedule every week and taking out what you're just putting in there for the sake of pleasing somewhere else, or putting in for the sake of squeezing it into that week when it's not actually a priority or a necessity that week, is such a good skill to get into every Sunday evening. I tell that to clients. It's like, look at your schedule ahead and limit what is actually not necessary next week. Because what that next hour that you took out could be that hour that is the reason why you feel recharged and you have a great, date with your partner that evening, which you wouldn't have had, and you would have argued had you put that other thing in. All these things are intertwined. And so when you can actually get really clear about your own boundaries with your time and what you need, it's such an important thing for emotional stress and stress in general.
Now, I'll ask you a tricky question. So, a lot of times when people are stressed or they're anxious and someone tells them, oh, don't be stressed, they get really triggered by that. They're like, oh, okay, sorry, I forgot. I should just think about not being stressed. So we are not telling them to not be stressed. You said the number one thing is to recognize where it comes from. But in a moment where someone is feeling a little bit overwhelmed or stressed by external things, what is your advice to deal with that moment?
That moment, I would say ask them 2 questions, because a lot of time, we want to fix the situation for someone because we're humans and we either want to help someone we love or whatever it is to actually ask them instead what they need. So say, would you like me to listen and talk to me and tell me everything that's going on right now? Or would you like me to help you find a solution? Those are 2 very different things, right? A sounding board is a very different thing to someone trying to fix the situation. And the truth of the matter is that if the person isn't in the, position of within their own mind that they want help, you can never help someone who's not ready to help themselves, right? And some people just actually need that sounding board to be able to then feel, you know what, someone cares. They've listened to me, and
just
now
did an event.
They've had an event, but in a way that they've sort of released and kind of come to clarity themselves in the way that almost like a coach does, asking questions and just sounding back what the person's saying rather than saying, this is what you should be doing. Giving someone that space for them to be heard and seen and listen. That most people in the world, all they want is to feel heard and seen. And that's what most humans need, that feeling of being like, that person really saw me and I really feel much better for that. And I understand that now. Or asking them, would you like me to help you find a solution and do something about this? And most of the time, most people will say, no, I'm okay, I'll work it out, because they just wanted that sounding board. Sometimes they'll be like, yes, actually, how can I take action on this? But I think it is in that moment, just saying, okay, I'm here. Would you like me to, help you find a solution, or would you like me to just listen? And that's the kind of different shift that you need to sort of see which one it is, first of all.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I love that you said. And Sahil Bloom also always says that, where he says, whenever someone comes to you with a problem, always ask them, do you want to be helped, hugged, or heard? Exactly. Right? Because sometimes someone just needs a hug. Sometimes they just need to vent. And sometimes they need you to come help now. Let's devise a solution to this. But no, that's absolutely true. And I think a lot of times the mismatch comes with us assuming what the other person wants. And communication always helps all of these things.
Yeah.
But now, any parting messages about the book? Anything you want to tell the audience about the book as well?
So yeah, the book is, it's written with the wonderful Mo Gaudat, who's my co-author on it, and we are yin and yang. Mo is that wonderful logical engineer, as you know, and just incredible. And so we've loved putting the 2 of us together, because I'm the more emotive, softer side of those things, but we both very much believe in what the other one is saying, and that's why it kind of has complemented one another in a nice way. And it's, if you want to learn how to deal with mental stress, emotional stress, physical stress, and spiritual stress, and become unstressable in that way, so you can manage these parts of ourselves that we haven't been brought up knowing what is going on and how to deal with it, Unstressable is really that solution for people to give them, it's a lot of information in it, there really is. So it's something that we found that people say, like, I can delve into it and come back to it when I need it, as well as reading the whole thing through. And we, for me, it's really about breaking the cycle. I think with stress and with anxiety, we break the cycle or the cycle breaks you. That's the reality of it. And having that awareness to stop and pause and see where you're actually at within yourself and your life, stress-wise and, emotionally and mentally, physically, spiritually, it's really starting to be aware and then making the changes after that. It's the only way we can do it, really.
Amazing. And any parting message with people who deal with little day-to-day stresses?
Day-to-day stresses. I think it's really, my parting message is really, really, really start to think about how you wake up in the day, because how you begin your day will decide how you respond to the rest of it. And I don't think people put enough weight behind the end and start of their day and managing the tiny little daily stresses that we deal with. If you wake up and do 7 days consecutively of a 5-minute morning routine or a half an hour one, depending what you have time for, because some people will say, understandably, my kids wake me up first thing in the morning and then it's go, and I just don't even have time for myself. And that is perfectly fine. But you will have time to do, for example, put a Post-it note on your bedside table when your soothing alarm goes off and you don't look at your phone first straight away, or your child runs in. The first thing you can do is see that Post-it note and it says, choose your first thought. Just taking 2 seconds to close your eyes, take a deep breath, and you decide intentionally what that first thought of the day is going to be, and make it something that's going to be beneficial to you, rather than, oh my God, I haven't done that, this is that, and letting that narrative start straight away. Every single person has time to choose their first thought of the day with a reminder on their bedside table. If you don't have half an hour, we all have half a minute. And so I think it's, really starting to just make those little tiny changes to see the actual results.
Oh, I love that. I'm going to do the Post-it note. I think you should make it into an alarm clock or something that just goes there.
That's true. Little Post-it. Hello.
Yeah. But honestly, Alice, this was incredible. Thank you so much for your time. I can't wait to deep dive into the book, and hopefully we'll see you around.
No, thank you so much for having me. It's a wonderful conversation.